What's the weirdest social situation that you have ever experienced? My neighbors used to fight a lot. One day the woman was asking for help, so I called the police. But when the police arrived, the two neighbors said I was lying, and I spent about 20 minutes being humiliated and embarrassed by the police and the couple with the whole street seeing. From that day on, I never called again. He continued beating her to the point where she was kicked out of the house by the property owner because they broke everything and no one ever knew the man's whereabouts. The girl went crazy. Oh, I've got a ridiculous one. I was eating alone at a quiet pub due to staying away from home for work rather than social exclusion, and slowly the room around me started to fill with really sad-looking people. As more of them turned up, I noticed a few of them were also crying. The mood got more and more emotional, and looking around, a lot of them were wearing black suits and formal dresses and so on. Yeah, a frickin' funeral wake had come to the pub and sat on the tables surrounding my table. I was on a table in an area of the room which made it really difficult to just up and leave, and I only finished half my food and my pint, so I stuck it out, just really focusing on my food while this increasingly large crowd of extremely upset people filled the room. It was pretty awkward eating that meal, but not so awkward as when I stood up and a room full of puffy, teary faces looked up at me and followed my back out of the room. I managed that sort of flat smile, raised eyebrows look I think, then just absolutely did one out of the pub. Worst meal ever. Was in a Rocky Horror stage cast in the late 90s. Serially PS. One of the cast had a house that was pretty much just a place to party after shows. A bunch of us got together for New Year's Eve Y2K. At midnight the guy declared it to be naked time and stripped naked. I don't think anyone else followed suit, and there was a lot of look at the time as people got up and left. I was at a party and accidentally walked into a game that everyone was super into. I didn't know the rules and ended up totally lost. Everyone was laughing, but not in a mean way. I felt awkward, but also kinda connected, like we were all in this silly moment together. It was weird, but it taught me that it's okay to be a little out of place sometimes. Was invited to a student's quinceañera. It ended up being an evangelical laying on of hands to pray her back to being a good girl. Borderline speaking in tongues. I still don't know why they invited church outsiders, or why it was in any way considered her quinceañera. Watching porn with friends, male and female, after a night of drinking and smoking. I once found myself in this bizarre situation where I showed up to a party that I thought was a casual hangout, but it turned out to be a wedding reception. When Pokemon Go was a massive thing, I went to a local meetup for the Yellow team. I had moved to a new city a few weeks before the game released, thought it'd be a good way to meet some people in the area. Expected a group of similarly nerdy people trading Pokemon, socializing. Wound up at what was essentially a trap house. Dipped after seeing a fight. A gun flashed, a declaration of "IE, the Coke guy is here." In the first 5 minutes. When you feel the need to clumsily explain yourself after inadvertently waving back to someone who was not really waving at you. Me and my partner were out in the city one Friday night. It was a busy night, loads of other humans around. We walked down this alleyway that had around 10 to 15 people, not necessarily together, but on it. Randomly, a very angry-looking man with an axe just appeared, stormed up the alleyway. My partner put his arm in front of me. The other people that this guy passed looked around. The people he hadn't passed were looking at him, and he just carried on to wherever he was going. I was running late to my class, and when I entered they were debating if the earth is flat. I straight guy invited to a party my friend lesbian and her partner threw, to find I was the only guy there in a party of about 40. Got what I thought were some strange looks, did not stay long. Some random teacher offered me a bite of his half-eaten apple, and when I declined he called me an ungrateful kid. I went to a meeting with my fellow English classmates at a bar just to find out I was the only one in my class who had showed up, so I ended up spending the evening with a bunch of strangers from different classes. Funny is everyone knew who I was because they knew my dad, also absent, who was in their class. I sat between some guy and his mom that were arguing all the time, and I beat everyone at Scrabble. My MIL going to the hospital to visit my husband's ex-wife after the birth of the bastard child she had with the man she left my husband for. Closely followed by MIL flying across the country to babysit said bastard child for the ex, while my husband and I were home with her actual grandchildren from his marriage. I, meanwhile, have never been invited to lunch by MIL. Very odd social situation to navigate. Weirdest ever? Tricky one. Honestly, finding myself to be the only extrovert among introverts. Literally 99 of my friends are the kind of people who are either actually completely content to hang out alone all the time, or the kind who are too anxious to make friends. I also am one of the only friends who has a house. Combine those, and I am the person who constantly pulls a bunch of anxious homebodies out for parties. And like it's actually great. I love my role. I love introducing different people, etc., but it can sometimes be exhausting to be the one doing it all. And expensive. It's weird for me because growing up I was the weird anxious antisocial one who drifted around and had to be pulled into groups, so that shift still sometimes is surreal. I was at a party and an orgy broke out. I was bored, so I read a magazine. Meanwhile, a guy at the same party, also not partaking in the orgy, and was a virgin, stared between me and the orgy, shocked that I was just reading a magazine like it was no big deal. I got invited to a New Year's Eve party by some dancers I knew. As we're waiting outside the apartment waiting for the girls to show up, some dude pulls out a little pocket pistol to show it off. I snatched it out of his hands, ejected the magazine, unloaded it, and jacked the one he had in the pipe. I handed it back and said, "You're too fucking stupid to carry a loaded firearm." He avoided me the rest of the night. And yes, I was pretty drunk at the time. Notice here, once you hit puberty a switch goes off and you become self-conscious about yourself, and it's just weird at times. I had moments talking to friends or relatives where I had to excuse myself before things became weird. I showed up to a party by myself, and it turns out it was a swingers party.